Hi guys, it's Yashi. Today with something a little different. This is a real estate update. The reason is, yes, I love crypto, but my bread and butter is real estate. In this world full of negativity, I want to bring some positivity and be one of the few people who's actually very optimistic about what is happening with the home market in terms of buying a house. And let me explain you why. Let's get started here. We're gonna start out with interest rates. As you may know, interest rates have been going up for quite a while, since pretty much March or April of 2022. Mr. Powell, the chairman of the Fed, is trying to fight inflation by increasing interest rates and making it more difficult for companies and people to borrow money. And it sort of has been working. Now, this month actually pretty much, the CPI report came out and it beat expectations. On top of that, the Fed last week also spoke after increasing interest rates by 0.75%. And said that they're gonna take in concern other factors now. I don't want to go too much into the interpretation and the specifics of it, but basically it seems like they are starting to understand that something positive is happening, that their policy may be starting to work a little bit. And once the CPI report came out a few days later, we had confirmation. Inflation that was expected to go up by 8% last month actually increased by 7.7%. So the real inflation beat the expectation of what people expected. And we can double check here on the government website, 7.7%. On top of that, if you check as my pre-CPI report video I released the day before the CPI report, you might see that there are many factors that might start to kick in next month that dropped more than 7%. They dropped in the 70s%. It might affect inflation on the next month much more, and inflation might come down much more than what people expect. But that's again just information I found, not financial advice. Now back into mortgage rates. So the Fed talking in a certain way and the CPI report beating expectation made interest rates on a 30-year loan drop under 7%. That's the first time we saw such a large drop this year, as this year everybody was scared the interest rates would skyrocket all the time. So that's the first big move. And that's already a change of sentiment. Will we keep this change of sentiment over the medium term? That is the question. It all depends on what the Fed will do on the next month meeting and what the CPI will come out with. Now, the Fed is expected to increase by 0.5, let's say, percent the interest rates next month. That is pretty much what the majority is believing out there, bringing the interest rate to 4.25 to 4.5%. This is the base rate of the Fed and not the interest rate of mortgages, but the mortgages are pretty much based on that and many other factors. Now into the actual real estate data. And here's where stuff is really positive in my opinion from a home buyer perspective who wants to buy now, on top of also people that own already a house. Out there, many YouTubers and media are focusing on how demand is being destroyed. People don't want to buy a house, people are scared, there's a crisis and there's a crisis. Which, yes, there's a lot of negativity happening, inflation is bad, companies are starting to get a little scared, they're starting to lay off some people, but it's not dramatic. And if you look at the home prices and housing market, stuff is actually a little different, and many people are not focusing on what I believe is much more important than demand, which is the supply. So in the beginning of 2022, since the Fed started increasing interest rates, home sellers tried to push as much home inventory out there before interest rates would destroy the demand, as they wanted to lock in some good profits, which makes sense. If you look at the housing supply on Realtor.com among the first couple of months of 2022, yes, it is spiking at much higher rates than we saw pre-COVID and during COVID. However, if you look at the actual numbers, the amount of homes that are actively for sale, I don't know how to put it, it's bad, like it's really bad. There are under 800,000 homes for sale now. That is not even pre-pandemic levels right here, over 1 million. This is scary. Supposedly that demand actually dropped 30%, as for example Fortune said. There's a Fortune article that mentioned it a couple of weeks ago. The supply is still down over 30% compared to pre-pandemic, and that is really scary. Another thing is happening that is nobody has been mentioning, which is even worse. So we already know here that the supply of homes is lower pretty much the lowest, one of the lowest in the history of the United States. The lowest that we saw was probably the beginning of 2022. Now, we also see the trend here that has a large increase from April to July, but then it's starting to plateau and maybe even move down. I believe it will move down because if we look at new listings coming up on the market, the data is scary. It's really bad for home buyers and actually pretty positive for home sellers. Why? If you look at newly listed homes here, these are pre-pandemic, and then this here is 2021. The amount of new homes that are being listed on the market is lower than pandemic and pre-pandemic. And while it increased a lot in the beginning of the year, now it's falling off a cliff at quicker levels than we saw during the pandemic and before the pandemic. Which means that this trend here, unless demand is slashed to zero, will now revert and go back down, bringing us to maybe one of the lowest supplies of homes in the history of the United States. What does this mean for the average home buyer? Well, even if there are less people now with which you're competing against to buy a house, there's so few homes that there's more people per home competing to buy the house. Meaning, prices will not drop as everybody is expecting, or they might start to increase again, especially if the Fed starts pivoting or stopping interest rate hikes. Why? Because interest rates on mortgages might stabilize or come back down, incentivizing people to come back on the market. Especially in a time where rents are sky high. People want to go out of rent because it's eating in their pocket. So if you're expecting a crisis to come, I don't know. I'm not really sure about that. The data is actually speaking against it. And so yeah, I don't know. I'm just giving you data here. I'm not convinced about it, but the data is actually speaking against a home crash. Now, if you look at specific markets like California, Phoenix, Florida, yes, prices drop. But why did it drop? Because they increased too much. They exploded. And now that people don't want to buy there anymore, or they're moving somewhere else that is a little bit cheaper, sellers are incentivized to, or like kind of forced to drop prices, or else they're never gonna sell the house. However, if you look at this data, which is on a US general level, this is US averages, the data is looking very positive for the home seller who is expecting a price drop. It might not come. I mean, if you're realistic with the prices you're putting out there when you're listing your house, you should be good, especially if the house is a good house. But most of all, home buyers that are expecting a crisis to buy in at cheap, I don't think it's gonna happen. So maybe this is probably one of the best times to buy because sellers are still scared, so you might be able to negotiate something. And it is right before people get comfortable with the new status quo. This is my opinion, not financial advice, but I simply wanted to give out my opinion based on my interpretation of data here. Guys, I hope this gave you some general idea about the real estate market. If you're a seller, I hope this made you happy. If you're a buyer, I hope this made you a little bit more aware of the situation and gave you a different point of view. If you like what I'm doing, please like and subscribe. And thank you for watching. Ciao.